What's up, and welcome back to Interpreting the Stars, where today we're continuing our Karate Kid vs. Three Ninjas movie marathon with the fourth film on the Karate Kid side. It's The Next Karate Kid, starring Hilary Swank in her breakout film role as the next Karate Kid, and this was the series trying to reinvigorate itself, maybe breathe some new life into it for, I don't know, a different audience, without completely rebooting itself either, since we still had Pat Morita in the role as Mr. Miyagi. And this was a film that I somewhat remembered, and not only because of Hilary Swank, but certain scenes kind of came flooding back while watching too, which is not a bad thing. But we're at the end of the classic Karate Kid films, which begs the question on if it really did reinvigorate itself, or if it's just a pejorative installment. Let's get cracking. This review is brought to you by the word of the day, pejorative, having negative connotations. The Next Karate Kid introduces us to Julie Pierce, an angsty teenage girl who constantly rebels in life because she is just so angry that both her mother and father died so many years ago in a terrible accident. So Mr. Miyagi does what he does best. He decides to teach her karate in an effort to present a healthy outlet for her anger, which will teach her joy and respect along the way. It's been a wild ride, guys, and now we're at the girl Karate Kid movie. I wasn't sure if I would remember this or not, but like I said, there were definitely parts in here that I did remember, but most of the things that I remembered, I couldn't fully connect to any kind of plot. That's because this is the most intrinsic film of the bunch. They all have intrinsic moments here and there where the Karate Kid has to learn something important to help them grow as a person. But this was, above all else, man versus self. So there's a ton of story, there's a ton of character development, but there's actually not much else. There's actually barely any karate in the film. I don't remember one sequence here where Julie's being taught karate by Mr. Miyagi. She just kind of switches from not knowing it to knowing it, and that transition is kind of sudden. It's a bit harsh and unbelievable. There's also barely even a physical villain either. There kind of is. At Julie's school, there's like this teacher training kids to fight, kind of like Cobra Kai, and I don't know what this class is supposed to be, but this adult teacher is physically beating up all the students in the school in clear daylight, and nobody seems to care. The thing about it is, these were mostly useless villains. You know that they would probably show up towards the end at the climax, but why they're in the film in the first place, other than that, seems oddly random and unspecific. It was a villain, basically just made to be a villain. And I'm not entirely sure it was useful because this was primarily man versus self. So in general, I don't think the setup for the story was very strong, but I did very much enjoy a couple of things. First, I loved Hilary Swank. I think she did a great job here. She basically had to prove to the audience that she had four emotions: angst, sorrow, joy, and, just your basic seriousness. And out of all of those four emotions, three of them she pulled off very well. And you could probably guess which ones because it's Hilary Swank. That is angst, sorrow, and seriousness. She's a great actress that can pull off drama incredibly well, but her joy seemed forced. Walking around all smiley and respectful like, I didn't buy it, unfortunately. I also really liked her chemistry with Mr. Miyagi. Miyagi was always kind of a parental force, and the father-son dynamic in the previous films was always something commendable and nice to see, but the father-daughter dynamic? I actually think it worked a lot better. You would typically see Mr. Miyagi teaching a student something unconditional and confusing, which turned into a fight move, sort of like, with wax on, wax off, stuff like that. But this did something kind of the opposite. You see Mr. Miyagi teach Julie a couple of fight moves, which turns into teaching her how to dance for the school event. Now that was actually incredibly sweet, and you feel that familial bond. Another great thing about this film is that Hilary Swank's character is caring for a hawk on the roof of the school. She's doing it in secret, but this entire relationship she has with this wounded hawk is a mirroring metaphor. Because when the film opens up, she's also wounded, just in a different way. And as she cares for this hawk, so too does Mr. Miyagi care for her. And the more that she begins to respect the world and heal, so too does the bird. And that's something that I can definitely respect. Now, one thing that I really didn't care for in this film is the introduction, which just wanted to get to the point as soon as humanly possible, and so they rushed to the point of just having Mr. Miyagi and Julie alone, and the entire introduction before that's just kind of confusing. Mr. Miyagi goes to some kind of war event, and an old war buddy of his is now dead, but he still has a widow. Now, the widow, Mr. Miyagi's still friends with, so he hangs out with her and he meets her granddaughter, Julie. And when Mr. Miyagi sees that Julie is having problem behavior, he invites the grandmother to go stay at his house in California while he stays at her house and looks after her granddaughter. And the grandmother's like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I don't know, guys. It doesn't make sense. I don't really buy it. They needed some kind of explanation for it to work, but it wasn't built up very well. And parts of it were actually creepy, because none of that is how actual people act. Not only that, but I'm pretty sure Julie would have avoided this old guy who she's never met before as much as humanly possible because he's a stranger. Yeah, this has the poorest introduction out of any of the movies, but I don't think that's why the film ultimately failed. I think it failed because it's a Karate Kid film without much karate, without Daniel LaRusso, any of that. And even the karate that it does have isn't shot or edited very well. Most of it, you don't actually see much of what's going on because it's zoomed in so much. So I definitely appreciated what they were doing with character development, with the intrinsic storyline, with the mirroring metaphorical relationship between Julie and the Hawk. And I really liked Hilary Swank in the role. But as a Karate Kid film, it needed more than what it had. And it needed to pay more attention when it was filming those fight scenes, because there wasn't many of them, so what it had, it needed to be better at. My unbiased score is 64%, and just because I liked Hilary Swank and thought her chemistry with Mr. Miyagi was sweet, my bias score is a little bit higher at 68%, averaging everything out to a final score of 66%, 66 out of 100 possible stars, making this the lowest scored Karate Kid movie out of the bunch, which is, it's a shame because there really are moments here that I liked, and if they made the, next Karate Kid 2, maybe they would have picked up on the stuff that didn't work so much for this film and then made a really special film. But unfortunately, we'll never know. Guys, let me know your thoughts on the next Karate Kid in the comments down below. As far as original classic films in the series go, which one do you think is the best? And as for YouTube, you know what you should do. Hit the like button if you like this review, because there's more like it coming out. Hit the subscribe button and bell to be notified when I come out with my next review. That is slated to be the next James Bond film for my Bond marathon, License to Kill. So make sure that you don't miss out on that. And until then, peace out.